Breesis Yarrow hated dentists, but she hated the throbbing pain in her back molar more. When she called for an emergency appointment, the receptionist assured her Dr. Palmer was the best, famous for his gentle touch and special treatments for anxiety. Breesis should have hung up when she heard the strange enthusiasm in her voice. She should have run the moment she stepped into the empty office that smelled of bleach and rotting fruit. But the pain kept her anchored to the vinyl chair, ignoring the primal instinct screaming that the man with the gray eyes wasn't looking at her teeth. He was looking at her neck. And the syringe in his hand didn't hold anesthesia. It held an invitation for something that had been waiting for her in the dark for centuries. The overhead light hummed with a frequency that felt wrong, like a wasp trapped inside her skull. Breesis Yarrow pressed her fingernails into the cracked vinyl armrest of the dental chair, anchoring herself to something solid while the fluorescent tubes above flickered in a rhythm that made her stomach clench. The office smelled of bleach and something underneath it, something organic and faintly sweet like fruit left too long in the sun. Dr. Palmer's office had always unsettled her, but today the wrongness pressed against her skin like static electricity before a storm. The walls were too beige, the certificates too perfectly aligned, the instruments on the tray too precisely arranged. Everything screamed normalcy with such insistence that it became its own kind of scream. Just a routine cleaning, Dr. Palmer had said when she'd called to confirm the appointment that morning. His voice had carried that same smooth reassurance it always did, professional and distant. But when she'd arrived, the waiting room had been empty. No receptionist at the desk. No other patients flipping through outdated magazines. Just silence. And that smell. She'd almost left then, her hand on the door handle, but the pain in her back molar had been building for weeks. The throbbing had become a constant companion, a pulse that matched her heartbeat and reminded her with every swallow that something was wrong, something needed fixing. So she'd stayed. Now, she lay in the chair, tilted back at an angle that made her feel like she was falling, while Dr. Palmer moved around the room with movements too fluid, too practiced. He didn't look at her directly. His eyes, pale gray, she noticed for the first time, seemed to focus on a point just above her forehead, as if he were reading something written in the air. Open wide, Miss Yarrow. His gloved fingers tasted of latex and that same sweet rot smell. She opened her mouth, her jaw already aching from tension, and tried to focus on the water-stained ceiling tiles instead of the metal instruments he was selecting. The drill started with a whine that set her teeth on edge. "You'll need sedation for this," Dr. Palmer said, his voice cutting through the drill's descending whir. He'd stopped mid-examination, his mirror tool still pressed against her lower teeth. "The cavity is deeper than I thought. Much deeper." Breesis tried to speak around his fingers, managed only a questioning sound in the back of her throat. "Just a mild sedative. You'll be awake but relaxed. You won't feel a thing." He withdrew his hands and moved to a cabinet she hadn't noticed before, tucked into the corner where the shadows seemed to pool thicker than they should. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. To sit up, spit out the paper bib, and walk out into the October afternoon where the sun still existed, where people moved on sidewalks and cars honked and the world made sense. But the pain in her tooth pulsed again, sharp and insistent. And Dr. Palmer was already approaching with the syringe. The needle was wrong. She knew that immediately, though she couldn't have explained how. It was too large, the liquid inside too dark, not clear like Novocaine but amber, viscous, moving too slowly when he tapped the barrel. "This will just take a moment," he said, and his voice had changed, dropped lower, lost its professional veneer. The needle pierced the inside of her cheek. Cold spread, through her mouth first, then down her throat like swallowing ice water too fast. But it didn't stop at her throat. It kept spreading, flowing through her veins with a sensation that was almost audible, a whisper of wrongness threading through her bloodstream. The room began to tilt. Not the chair. The room itself, walls sliding sideways while the ceiling pressed down and the floor seemed to drop away beneath her. Dr. Palmer's face loomed above her, features stretching and contracting like a reflection in disturbed water. "There we are," he murmured, and she realized with distant horror that his lips weren't moving in sync with his words. "I've been waiting for you, Miss Yarrow." waiting for someone with your particular qualities. She tried to move her arms. They felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and useless, pinned to the armrests by invisible weights. Your blood, he continued, setting down the syringe and picking up something else. Not a dental instrument, something that gleamed too darkly in the stuttering light. It calls to them, you know, the old ones. They can smell it from miles away, that rare vintage. But I found you first. Terror tried to rise in her chest, but the drug smothered it, wrapped it in cotton wool, and pushed it down. She could only watch as he moved closer, that dark implement in his hand, his gray eyes finally meeting hers and reflecting nothing, absolutely nothing, like looking into the eyes of a doll. The door was locked. She'd heard the click when she'd first sat down, had registered it somewhere in the back of her mind, but dismissed it as normal, as procedure. Now she understood. There was no one else in the building, no receptionist to hear, no other patients to interrupt. Just her and Dr. Palmer and whatever he was planning to do with that blade. She tried to scream, but her throat wouldn't work, the muscles slack and unresponsive. Only a thin whimper emerged, barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. Dr. Palmer smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry," he said, leaning over her with the blade, catching the light in silver flashes. "You won't remember any of this. Not the way it really happened. You'll wake up thinking you had a bad reaction to the sedative, a nightmare brought on by anxiety. And I'll have what I need to." The lights went out. Not flickered. Died completely, plunging the office into absolute darkness, so sudden and total that it felt like being buried alive. Dr. Palmer's breath caught. She heard him step back, heard the blade clatter against the instrument tray. "Oh," he started to say. The window exploded inward. Glass rained down in a cascade of sound, tinkling and shattering, and with it came the October night. Cold air and the smell of rain, and something else, something ancient and powerful that cut through the chemical stench of the office like a blade through silk. A figure moved in the darkness. Not walked. Moved. There one moment, beside Dr. Palmer the next, too fast for her drug mind to track. She heard Dr. Palmer make a sound. Not a scream, something worse, something that held recognition and absolute terror. Then silence. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in red. And she saw him. He stood where Dr. Palmer had been, holding the doctor by the throat with one hand, lifting him off the ground as easily as if he weighed nothing. But it wasn't the impossible strength that made her breath stop. It was him. Tall, impossibly so, dressed in black that seemed to absorb the red emergency light rather than reflect it. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, framing a face that was beautiful in the way that storms were beautiful, dangerous and ancient and utterly compelling. His eyes found hers across the room, and they were the color of smoke and silver and something that had no name. "Sleep," he said to Dr. Palmer, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place, something old and formal. "And when you wake, you will leave this city and never return. You will forget her face, her name, her existence." Dr. Palmer's eyes rolled back. The man, if he was a man, released him, and the doctor crumpled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Then those silver eyes were on her again, and he was moving toward her with that same impossible speed and grace. She should have been terrified. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should be more afraid of this stranger than she'd been of Dr. Palmer. But when he reached her, when his hand, cool and steady, touched her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache, all she felt was safe. "You are safe now, my love," he whispered, gathering her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, as if he'd done this 1,000 times before. His scent wrapped around her, sandalwood and rain and something wild, something that belonged to forests and moonlight and places humans had forgotten. The last thing she saw before the drug finally pulled her under was his face above hers, beautiful and terrible and somehow familiar, as they vanished into the night. Consciousness returned in fragments. The sensation of movement, the whisper of wind against her face, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't hers pressed against her ear. Brisis's eyes fluttered open to darkness broken by streetlights that blurred past like falling stars. She was being carried, held against a chest that felt like carved marble beneath expensive fabric. The arms around her were impossibly strong, yet cradled her with a tenderness that made something in her chest twist and ache. Easy, that voice murmured, the one that had commanded Dr. Palmer into oblivion. Up close, it resonated through her, vibrating in her bones. The drug will take time to clear your system. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt thick, her thoughts swimming through honey. The world tilted as he moved, and she caught glimpses of her surroundings. They were no longer in the warehouse district. Gothic architecture rose around them, buildings that belonged to the oldest part of the city, the part tourists photographed but locals avoided after dark. Gargoyles leered from cornices. Iron gates twisted into shapes that might have been flowers or might have been screaming faces. Where? The word came out slurred. Somewhere safe. He adjusted his hold on her, and she felt the shift of muscle, the controlled power in every movement. Somewhere he cannot follow. The night air tasted of rain and old stone. Breesis forced her eyes to focus on his face, that impossibly beautiful face framed by dark hair that caught the moonlight. His skin was pale, luminous in a way that had nothing to do with cosmetics and everything to do with something fundamentally other. Those silver eyes glanced down at her, and she saw concern there, genuine and deep. "Who are you?" she managed. Something flickered across his features. Pain, longing, recognition. "My name is Thaddeus Vane." He paused before a massive iron gate that seemed to materialize from the shadows. It swung open without him touching it, hinges silent despite their obvious age. "And I've been searching for you for a very long time." The gate closed behind them with a whisper of finality. Beyond lay a courtyard that belonged to another century. Cobblestones gleamed with recent rain, reflecting the warm glow of gas lamps that lined a path to a mansion that made Breesis's breath catch despite the lingering fog in her mind. 3 stories of weathered stone and arched windows, with ivy climbing the walls like veins. Towers rose at each corner, their peaks lost in the low-hanging clouds. It looked like something from a Gothic novel, beautiful and slightly sinister and utterly impossible in the heart of the modern city. "This isn't real," she whispered. "It's very real." Thaddeus carried her up stone steps worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The massive oak door opened before them, again, without anyone touching it, revealing an entrance hall that stole what little breath she had left. Candlelight. Everywhere. Candles and iron sconces and crystal chandeliers, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries that depicted scenes from myths she half remembered. The floor was polished marble, black and white in a pattern that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at it. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister carved with figures that might have been angels or demons, depending on the angle of the light. The air inside smelled of beeswax and old books and something else, something that reminded her of the library's oldest section, where leather bindings crumbled to dust if you weren't careful. "Master!" A figure emerged from the shadows at the base of the stairs. Young, perhaps 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a style that was both modern and somehow timeless. His eyes were amber, catching the candlelight like a cat's. He moved with the same liquid grace as Thaddeus, and when his gaze fell on Breesis, she saw recognition there. "You found her. Silas." Thaddeus's voice held warmth. "Prepare the blue room, and send for Meredith. She'll need medical attention." The drug. Silas's expression darkened. "Among other things." Thaddeus's arms tightened fractionally around her. "Palmer had her." He was moments away from. He didn't finish the sentence, but the temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. Silas's jaw clenched. "The council will have to be informed. Let them come." The words were soft, but they carried the weight of absolute conviction. "I will not apologize for protecting what is mine." What is mine? The possessiveness in those words should have frightened her, should have sent every alarm bell in her head ringing. Instead, Breesis felt that strange sense of safety intensify, wrapping around her like a blanket. "I don't understand," she said, and was pleased to hear her voice coming clearer now. "Any of this. You did something to Dr. Palmer. Made him collapse just by speaking. And this place." She gestured weakly at the impossible grandeur around them. "How is this here? I've lived in this city my whole life. I've never seen." Because we do not wish to be seen. Thaddeus began climbing the stairs, and Silas fell in a step beside them. Our kind has perfected the art of existing in plain sight while remaining invisible to those who might fear us. Our kind. The words hung in the air between them. Breesis's heart began to pound harder, the drug's fog finally clearing enough for the pieces to slot together. The impossible speed, the supernatural command in his voice. The way Dr. Palmer had looked at him with absolute terror. The pale skin, the old-world formality, the mansion that existed outside of time. "You're not human," she whispered. Thaddeus met her eyes, and she saw the truth there before he spoke it. "No, I am not." The hallway at the top of the stairs stretched in both directions, lined with portraits whose subjects seemed to watch them pass. Thaddeus turned left, carrying her toward a door at the end that stood slightly ajar. Warm light spilled from within. "I should be terrified," Breesis said, more to herself than to him. "I should be screaming." "Yes." He shouldered the door open, revealing a bedroom that took her breath away. Four-poster bed with midnight blue velvet curtains. A fireplace where flames danced without any visible wood. Windows that looked out over the courtyard and the impossible gardens beyond. "You should, but you're not, are you?" He laid her on the bed with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the strength she'd felt in his arms. The mattress was soft, the pillows like clouds. She sank into them, her body finally beginning to relax as the last of the drug's hold loosened. "No," she admitted. "I'm not afraid of you." Thaddeus knelt beside the bed, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the sharp angle of his jaw, the fullness of his mouth. He was devastatingly beautiful, but it was the expression in those silver eyes that held her, a mixture of relief and wonder and something that looked like grief. "You should be," he said softly. "I am a monster, Breesis Yarrow. I have lived for 4 centuries by drinking the blood of the living. I have killed. I have destroyed. I am everything your kind tells stories about to frighten children in the dark." She should have recoiled, should have scrambled away from him, demanded to be released, screamed for help. Instead, she reached out with a hand that barely trembled and touched his face. His skin was cool beneath her fingertips, smooth as marble but somehow still yielding. Human enough to fool the casual observer. Other enough that her hindbrain recognized the predator beneath. "Then why do I feel safe with you?" she whispered. His eyes closed, and she felt him lean in her touch like a man dying of thirst finally finding water. "Because you remember," he breathed. "Some part of you, buried deep, remembers." "Remembers what?" Before he could answer, a knock sounded at the door. A woman entered, older, perhaps 60, with silver hair coiled at the nape of her neck and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a leather medical bag that looked like it had been crafted before modern medicine existed. "Meredith." Thaddeus rose, stepping back to give the woman room. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Of course." Meredith's voice was crisp, professional, but Breesis caught the warmth beneath it. She approached the bed with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Let me see her." The examination was thorough and surprisingly gentle. Meredith checked her pulse, her pupils, asked questions about the drug and what she remembered. Her hands were warm, human, and Breesis felt some of the surreal tension ease. "She'll be fine," Meredith announced finally. The drug was a strong sedative, but it's already clearing her system. No permanent damage. She turned to Thaddeus, and her expression hardened. "Palmer, gone. I sent him away with a compulsion to leave the city and forget her existence. You should have killed him." Meredith's words were matter of fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "Men like that don't stop." "I wanted to." Thaddeus's voice was barely above a whisper, but Breesis heard the violence coiled beneath it. "But she was there. I wouldn't have her first true memory of me be one of bloodshed." First true memory. The words suggested others. False ones or forgotten ones, or ones that hadn't happened yet. Meredith's expression softened fractionally. "Get some rest," she said to Breesis. "You're safe here. Safer than you've been in a very long time." She packed her bag and left, closing the door softly behind her. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the crackle of the impossible fire. Breesis pushed herself up against the pillows, her strength returning now that the drug had loosened its hold. Thaddeus stood by the window, his back to her, tension visible in every line of his body. I need answers, she said. Real ones. Not cryptic hints about remembering or being yours. What did Dr. Palmer want with me? Why did you call me my love, like you knew me? And what did Silas mean about the council? Thaddeus turned, and the firelight cast his face in sharp relief, beautiful and terrible and ancient. You deserve the truth, he said. All of it. But some truths are dangerous, Breesis. Once you know them, there is no going back to the life you knew. I think that ship sailed the moment you crashed through that warehouse ceiling. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Fair enough. He moved to a chair near the fire, settling into it with that preternatural grace. You asked what Palmer wanted with you. The answer is simple and terrible. Your blood. My blood. Not just any blood. Your blood is rare, Breesis. Perhaps 1 in 10 million humans carries the genetic markers that make you. He paused, searching for words. Ambrosia to my kind. Intoxicating. Addictive. Powerful beyond measure. A single drop can sustain a vampire for weeks. A full feeding can grant abilities that most of us only dream of. The room seemed to tilt. You're saying I'm what? Some kind of vampire delicacy. More than that. You're a rare blood. And there are those in my world who would kill entire cities to possess you. His hands gripped the chair's arms hard enough that she heard the wood creak. Palmer was working for someone. Someone who knew what you were and wanted you for themselves. How do you know what I am? Because I can smell it on you. I've been able to since the moment I came within a mile of that warehouse. Your scent. He closed his eyes, and she saw his jaw clench. It calls to every instinct I possess. Hunger. Protection. Possession. You are a siren's song made flesh, and every vampire who comes near you will feel it. Fear finally began to creep in, cold fingers trailing down her spine. So you brought me here to what? Keep me as some kind of food source. His eyes snapped open, and the intensity in them pinned her to the bed. I brought you here to protect you. Because if I had left you in that warehouse, if I had let Palmer take you, you would have disappeared into the black market that trades in rare bloods. You would have been bled slowly, kept alive but broken, until there was nothing left of the woman you are. He stood, moving toward her with controlled urgency. I have spent lifetimes searching for you, Breesis. Not to feed from you, not to use you, but to keep you safe from those who would. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Why would you spend lifetimes searching for someone you've never met? He stopped at the edge of the bed, and she saw something break in his expression. A dam giving way to a flood of emotion, so intense it stole her breath. Because I have met you, he said hoarsely, 3 times across 3 centuries. You are born, you live, you die, and you are reborn again. Different names, different faces, but always the same soul. Always the same eyes. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, but not quite touching. And every time I find you, every time I fall in love with you. And every time, I lose you. The world stopped. Breesis's heart hammered against her ribs, her mind reeling. Reincarnation. Past lives. It was impossible, insane, the stuff of fantasy novels and late-night philosophical debates. But looking into his eyes, seeing the weight of centuries there, the grief and hope and desperate longing, she believed him. The council, she managed. What did Silas mean? Thaddeus's expression shuddered. The Vampire Council governs our kind. They maintain the laws that keep us hidden from humanity. And one of their most sacred laws is this. No vampire may reveal themselves to a human. No vampire may interfere in human affairs. No vampire may claim a human as their own. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I have broken all 3 laws tonight. What happens when you break their laws? Execution. For me, and for you, if they deem you too dangerous to live. The fear that had been creeping in now crashed over her like a wave. Then why? Why would you risk that? Because I have lived 400 years without you. He finally touched her face, his cool palm cupping her cheek. And I would rather face final death than live another century alone. A sound from outside. Footsteps, multiple pairs, moving with purpose through the courtyard below. Thaddeus's head snapped toward the window, his body going rigid. "They're here," he said, and she heard the resignation in his voice. "The council's enforcers. Someone informed them faster than I anticipated. What do we do?" He looked at her, and she saw him making a decision. "You stay here. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you do not leave this room. Silas will protect you if—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "Just stay here." He moved toward the door with that impossible speed, but Breesis was already scrambling from the bed, her legs unsteady but holding. "No." The word came out stronger than she felt. "If they're here because of me, I'm not hiding while you face them alone. Breesis, you said I've lived before, that we've done this 3 times. She crossed him, her heart pounding but her resolve solid. "Did I hide then?" Something flickered in his eyes. Memory, pride, grief. "No, you never hid. That's part of why I always lost you." "Then I'm not starting now." Before he could argue, the door burst open. Not Silas. Not Meredith. 3 figures in dark clothing that seemed to absorb the candlelight. Their faces pale and sharp and utterly inhuman. Their eyes glowed with an inner light, red like embers. The one in front, a woman with white blonde hair, pulled back so tightly it looked painful, smile without warmth. "Thaddeus Vane," she said, her voice like silk over razors. "The council requests your immediate presence. You stand accused of exposing our kind to a human, of interfering in human affairs, and of harboring a rare blood without council approval." Her red eyes slid to Breesis. "The human comes with us as evidence." "No." Thaddeus moved to stand between them, and Breesis felt the temperature drop, felt power rolling off him in waves. "She is under my protection." "Your protection means nothing." The woman's smile widened. "You are not king anymore, Thaddeus. You abdicated that right when you chose to chase ghosts across the centuries. The council rules now, and we do not tolerate lawbreakers." "King." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Breesis's mind reeled. Not just a vampire king. "I will come willingly," Thaddeus said, his voice deadly calm. "But she stays here, under Silas's protection, until the council makes its judgment." The council has already made its judgment. The enforcer's hand moved faster than Breesis could track, and suddenly she was holding a silver blade that gleamed with unnatural light. "You will both come. Now, or we will drag your corpses." The other 2 enforcers moved to flank them, cutting off any escape. Breesis's heart hammered, her earlier courage evaporating in the face of these creatures that made even Thaddeus look almost human by comparison. "It's okay," she whispered, reaching for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, cool and strong. "We'll face them together." He looked down at her, and she saw his heart breaking in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I'm so sorry. I thought this time would be different." The enforcers moved forward, and the last thing Breesis saw before they were surrounded was the door opening behind them. Silas, his face twisted in fury and helplessness, held back by some invisible force. Then cold hands gripped her arms, and the world dissolved into shadow and speed and the terrible certainty that she had just walked into a nightmare from which there might be no waking. The darkness had texture, thick and suffocating, pressing against Breesis's skin like cold velvet. When her vision cleared, she found herself in a chamber carved from black stone, lit by torches that burned with blue flame. The temperature dropped so sharply her breath came out in visible clouds. The enforcers released her, and she stumbled forward into Thaddeus's steadying arms. His body was rigid, every muscle coiled tight beneath his skin. "Welcome to the Obsidian Hall," a voice echoed from the shadows above, "where kings are unmade." Breesis's eyes adjusted slowly. They stood in the center of a circular chamber, surrounded by ascending tiers of stone seats. And in those seats sat vampires, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. The weight of their collective gaze made her knees weak. At the highest point sat a figure draped in robes the color of dried blood. Elder Corvus. Even from this distance, Breesis could feel the age rolling off him in waves, ancient and merciless. "Thaddeus Vane." Corvus's voice was sand scraping over stone. "Once our greatest king." Now, our greatest disappointment. You were warned. The mortal world is forbidden to those who have tasted the crown's power. Yet here you stand, reeking of attachment, of sentiment. I broke no law, Thaddeus said, his voice carrying through the chamber with regal authority. I took no life. I claimed no territory. I simply existed. You existed too close to her. Corvus gestured toward Bresis, and every eye in the chamber fixed on her with predatory intensity. Her heart lurched. The rare blood. We can smell it from here. Thaddeus. Intoxicating. Maddening. Do you truly expect us to believe you spent months in her presence and remained restrained? I have. Liar. The word came from a female vampire in the second tier, her face sharp and beautiful and cruel. No one resists the rare blood. It calls to us. It promises power beyond measure. You've tasted her. Admit it. I have not. Thaddeus's hand tightened around Brisis's. And I will not. Corvus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Then you're either the greatest fool in our history, or you found something more valuable than power. He paused, and a smile spread across his ancient face. Love. How quaint. Laughter rippled through the chamber, cold and mocking. Brisis felt it like needles against her skin. The law is clear, Corvus continued. A king who abdicates may not return to the mortal world if he forms an attachment. The risk is too great. You become a liability, Thaddeus, a weakness we cannot afford. Then change the law. Silence crashed down like a physical force. Corvus rose slowly from his seat, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. You dare. I dare. Thaddeus stepped forward, pulling Brisis with him. Your laws were written in an age of war and blood feuds. We are not that world anymore. We hide in shadows, pretending we still rule, while humanity builds weapons that could end us all. We cling to power through fear instead of earning respect through wisdom. I abdicated because I was tired of ruling through terror. But I will not apologize for finding something worth protecting. The chamber erupted. Voices shouted over each other, some in fury, some in what might have been agreement. Brisis's head spun with the cacophony. Enough! Corvus's voice silenced them all. He descended the tiers slowly, each step deliberate, until he stood 10 feet from them. Up close, his face was a map of centuries, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman. You speak of protection, Thaddeus, but can you protect her from yourself? When hunger rises, when her blood sings to you in the dark, when every instinct screams at you to feed. Yes, prove it. Corvus moved faster than thought. One moment he stood across from them. The next his hand was wrapped around Brisis's throat, lifting her off the ground. She gasped, her hands clawing at his iron grip. Stop! Thaddeus's roar shook the chamber. Make me. Corvus's smile was vicious. Show us your restraint, former king. I'm going to hurt her. I'm going to make her bleed. And you're going to stand there and watch, because if you attack me, if you lose control for even a moment, we'll know you're lying. We'll know you're dangerous. And we'll execute you both. Brisis's vision started to blur at the edges. Corvus's grip tightened, and she felt her pulse hammering against his palm. Please, she managed to choke out. Not to Corvus. To Thaddeus. Don't. She saw the war raging behind his eyes. Every muscle trembled. His fangs descended, sharp and white. His hands clenched in a fist so tight his knuckles went bloodless. But he didn't move. Interesting, Corvus murmured. He released her, and she crumpled to the stone floor, gasping. Thaddeus was beside her instantly, gathering her into his arms, his hands shaking as they checked her throat. You see, Corvus addressed the council. He has control, remarkable control, but control is not enough. The rare blood will always be a temptation, a danger, unless. He trailed off, and Brisis saw calculation flicker across his ancient face. Unless what? She rasped, her throat raw. Corvus tilted his head, studying her like a specimen. There is one law that supersedes all others, one bond that even the council cannot break. He paused. Marriage. The word hung in the air like a bell's toll. If Thaddeus were to take you as his eternal companion, bound by the old rites, then you would fall under his protection absolutely. The council could not touch you, could not separate you. You would become untouchable. Breesis's heart stuttered. What does that mean? The old rites. A blood oath, Corvus said softly. But not the kind you fear. No feeding. No turning. Simply a binding of souls. Your life would remain your own. Mortal, fragile, temporary. But for as long as you draw breath, you would be his, and he would be yours. The council would have no claim. There must be a catch, Thaddeus said, his voice hard with suspicion. Only one. Corvus's smile returned. The oath must be taken willingly. Freely, without coercion. She must choose you, Thaddeus, knowing full well what you are, what you've done, the blood on your hands from centuries past. She must accept all of it, and you must accept her mortality, watching her age while you remain unchanged, knowing you will lose her in what will feel like the blink of an eye. Breesis felt Thaddeus's arms tighten around her. She turned to look up at him and saw naked fear in his eyes. Don't, he whispered, don't do this for me. The cost is too high. What cost? She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. Loving you? That's not a cost, Thaddeus. That's a gift. You'll age. You'll die. I'll have to watch. Then watch. Bear witness. Isn't that what you've been doing all along? Witnessing the world, trying to protect it. She smiled, even though tears were sliding down her cheeks. Let me be the thing you witness most closely. Let me be the life you protect above all others. Breesis, I choose you. She said it loudly, clearly, so every vampire in the chamber could hear. I choose Thaddeus Vane. I accept him as he is. I offer myself freely, without coercion, for as long as my mortal life allows. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Corvus watched them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. So be it. The old rites will be performed at moonset. Until then, they are under council protection. Anyone who harms them answers to me. The tension broke like a snapped wire. Vampires began filing out, some looking disappointed, others thoughtful. The enforcers melted back into shadows. Corvus approached them one final time. You surprised me, girl. Most humans would run screaming from this choice. I'm not most humans, Breesis said. No. His ancient eyes studied her. No, you're not. Perhaps that's why the rare blood chose you. It always did have impeccable taste. He turned to Thaddeus. You found something precious, old friend. Don't waste it clinging to guilt. Then he was gone, and they were alone in the vast chamber. Thaddeus pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. She felt him shaking, with relief, with fear, with something too big for words. Are you sure? He whispered against her temple. There's still time to... I'm sure. She wrapped her arms around him. I've never been more sure of anything. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the blue torchlight, while the weight of centuries and the promise of a mortal lifetime settled around them like a cloak. When they finally pulled apart, Thaddeus took her hand and led her from the obsidian hall. They walked through corridors of stone that gradually gave way to wood, then to carpet, then to something that looked almost homey. Where are we? She asked. The old estate. The council maintains it for visiting dignitaries. He pushed open a heavy door. You should rest. The rites are intense. You'll need your strength. The room beyond took her breath away. A four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in deep burgundy velvet. Tall windows overlooked grounds shrouded in pre-dawn mist. Everything was Gothic and beautiful and slightly otherworldly. Will you stay? She asked. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll be here, watching over you. She climbed into the bed, still fully clothed, too exhausted to care. The mattress was impossibly soft. As her eyes drifted closed, she saw him settle into a chair by the window, his silhouette dark against the slowly lightening sky. Thaddeus. Yes. Thank you. For being worth choosing. She didn't hear his response. Sleep claimed her, deep and dreamless, while the vampire who loved her kept vigil in the shadows. And somewhere beyond the windows, the moon finally set on their old lives, making way for whatever strange and precious future they would build together.